Commander Zixtal floated in his observation pod high above the asteroid field and watched the small human ship drift through space like a lost child. The vessel called itself UES Falcon and carried only 43 crew members according to his scans. Zixtal had been studying human military tactics for 3 standard cycles now and found them deeply disappointing. They fought with emotion instead of logic, made impulsive decisions under pressure, and seemed to lack any real understanding of proper battle formation. The Hegemony Council had sent him here to observe this particular engagement because reports suggested something significant was about to happen. The notorious Kethrak raiding fleet was approaching this sector, and the humans had somehow learned about it in advance. Instead of fleeing like any sensible species would do, they had positioned their single ship directly in the raiders' path. Zixtal activated his recording systems and prepared to document what would likely be a very short and brutal demonstration of human tactical incompetence. He had already written most of his report in his mind. Humans were brave but foolish, willing to sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like honor and duty rather than making rational strategic decisions. The Galactic Council needed to understand that while humans might be useful as shock troops or cannon fodder, they lacked the sophisticated thinking required for real military leadership. The Kethrak were different. Zixtal had studied their combat records extensively and found them impressively efficient. They followed proven tactical doctrines, maintained proper formation discipline, and approached warfare with the cold calculation that marked truly advanced military thinking. War Chief Grakthos commanded this particular fleet, and his reputation for systematic destruction was well earned. He had reduced 17 colonies to ash over the past 2 cycles and never lost a single ship in the process. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human vessel and seemed remarkably calm for someone about to face impossible odds. Zixtal had read Morrison's service record and found it typical of human military careers. Lots of small conflicts, minor victories against other humans, and absolutely no experience fighting real galactic powers. The man had spent most of his career dealing with pirates and smugglers in the Outer Rim territories where serious military forces never bothered to patrol. The human ship moved deeper into the asteroid field instead of trying to escape, which confirmed Zixtal's assessment of their poor tactical thinking. Asteroid fields were death traps for military vessels because they limited maneuverability and provided countless opportunities for ambush. Any competent commander would avoid such terrain when facing superior numbers. Morrison was either suicidal or completely inexperienced in real combat operations. Zixtal adjusted his sensors to get better readings on the human ship's weapons systems. They carried standard plasma cannons and a modest supply of quantum torpedoes, nothing that would pose a serious threat to Kethrak battle armor. The raiders used bio-enhanced hulls that could absorb enormous amounts of damage, while their own weapons could slice through most known materials like cutting through soft vegetation. The communication systems crackled with automated distress. Signals from nearby shipping lanes as merchant vessels detected the approaching Kethrak fleet and fled in panic. This was standard procedure when the raiders appeared, since they were known to attack anything that moved in their target zones. The fact that the human ship was not fleeing only reinforced Zixtal's belief that they either did not understand the danger they faced or had suffered some kind of catastrophic failure in their command structure. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park worked at the tactical station aboard the Falcon, and her movements seemed oddly relaxed for someone preparing for battle. She ran diagnostic checks on the weapons systems but did not bring them to full combat readiness. The entire human crew appeared to be treating this like a routine patrol mission rather than a desperate last stand against overwhelming odds. Zixtal made notes about human psychological conditioning and wondered if they had been trained to suppress fear responses even in hopeless situations. This might explain their reputation for fierce resistance even when facing certain defeat. However, emotional control was no substitute for proper strategic planning, and the humans clearly had no real plan for dealing with 12 Kethrak attack. Ships. The asteroid field stretched for several light minutes in all directions and contained thousands of rocky bodies ranging from small pebbles to massive planetoids. Navigation through such terrain required constant attention and skilled piloting, which would make it even more difficult for the humans to coordinate any effective defense. They were essentially trapping themselves in a maze while their enemies approached from open space with complete freedom of movement. War Chief Grakthos had probably chosen this location specifically because he knew any prey that fled into the asteroids would become easy targets once his ships surrounded the field. The raiders could take their time picking apart the human vessel piece by piece, while the asteroids prevented any possibility of escape. Zixtal settled back in his observation chair and prepared to witness a textbook example of how not to conduct military operations against superior forces. The Kethrak fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a pack of hunting beasts emerging from tall grass. 12 sleek attack ships arranged themselves in perfect formation, while their bioluminescent hulls pulsed with threatening patterns that had terrorized countless species across the galaxy. War Chief Grakthos commanded the lead vessel and immediately began scanning for his prey with the patient confidence of a predator who had never failed to catch what he hunted. The human ship appeared on their sensors as a single bright dot moving slowly through the asteroid field. Grakthos studied the tactical display and felt satisfied with what he saw. The humans had trapped themselves in terrain that would make escape impossible once his ships surrounded the field. This would be another easy victory to add to his growing collection of conquered enemies. He activated the traditional intimidation display that had made lesser species surrender without firing a shot. All 12 Kethrak ships synchronized their energy cores and released a massive pulse of light that turned local space into a miniature star for several seconds. The display was designed to demonstrate overwhelming power and convince potential enemies that resistance would be futile. Captain Morrison watched the light show from his bridge and showed no visible reaction to the threat. His crew continued their work with the same calm efficiency they had maintained since entering the asteroid field. Lieutenant Commander Park monitored her tactical screens, while Navigator Chris Parker made small adjustments to their course that seemed random but kept them moving deeper into the maze of floating rocks. The lack of response from the human ship puzzled Grakthos because most species would either flee immediately or broadcast surrender terms when faced with such a demonstration. Instead, the humans maintained complete radio silence and continued moving through the asteroids as if the Kethrak fleet did not exist. This could mean they were either incredibly brave or too stupid to understand the danger they faced. Zixtal recorded everything from his observation position and noted the differences in behavior between the two forces. The Kethrak followed established military protocols, while the humans seemed to be making up their strategy as they went along. This reinforced his theory that humans lacked the sophisticated planning abilities necessary for serious military operations. The chase began with Grakthos splitting his fleet into 3 groups that would surround the asteroid field and prevent any possibility of escape. This was standard hunter tactics that had worked perfectly against dozens of other species over the years. The prey would panic when they realized they were surrounded and would make mistakes that exposed them to concentrated fire from multiple directions. However, the human ship did not panic when the Kethrak forces moved to surround them. Instead, Captain Morrison ordered his pilot to increase speed and dive deeper into the densest part of the asteroid field, where the space between rocks was barely wide enough for a single ship to pass through safely. This seemed like the desperate action of someone who had completely lost their tactical sense. Amy Chen piloted the Falcon through gaps that should have been impossible for a ship of that size to navigate. Her flying was either incredibly skilled or incredibly reckless as she scraped the hull against asteroid surfaces that would have torn apart most vessels. The human ship moved through the field like it belonged there, while the pursuing Kethrak ships had to slow down and maintain safe distances from the rocky obstacles. Grakthos felt his first moment of uncertainty as he watched the human ship. disappear and reappear between asteroids with fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural. The humans were navigating terrain that should have been deadly to any ship moving at such speeds, yet they showed no signs of damage or distress. Either they were extremely lucky, or they knew something about this asteroid field that his scanners were not detecting. The war chief ordered his ships to maintain pursuit, but found his formation becoming stretched out as different vessels had to take alternate routes around larger asteroids. The tight coordination that made Kethrock tactics so effective was beginning to break down as the terrain forced his ships to operate independently rather than as a unified hunting pack. Communications officer Dan Rodriguez aboard the Falcon monitored Kethrock transmissions and reported their growing frustration to Captain Morrison. The raiders were used to quick victories against enemies who fought in open space where their superior numbers and firepower could be brought to bear effectively. The asteroid field was neutralizing these advantages and forcing them to fight on terms they had not anticipated. Zixtal began to wonder if the humans had chosen this location deliberately rather than stumbling into it by accident. The way they moved through the field suggested familiarity with the terrain that could only come from extensive prior exploration. Perhaps they had been studying this asteroid field for some time and knew exactly where they were leading their pursuers. The chase continued for over an hour, with the human ship staying just ahead of the Kethrak forces while leading them deeper into increasingly dangerous terrain. Several times it looked like the raiders would catch their prey, only to watch the Falcon slip through narrow passages that seemed impossible to navigate at such speeds. The humans were not just running away. They were controlling the pace and direction of the pursuit in ways that should not have been possible for the hunted rather than the hunter. War. Chief Grakthos realized that something was very wrong with this engagement, but he could not identify exactly what was bothering him. The humans should have been caught by now, or should have made some kind of mistake that exposed them to his weapons. Instead, they continued their impossible flight through terrain that was becoming more dangerous with each passing minute as asteroids grew larger and spaces between them grew smaller. The human ship suddenly stopped moving and hung motionless in space surrounded by massive asteroids on all sides. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge with his hands clasped behind his back and watched the tactical display as 12 Kethrak ships closed in from different directions. His crew worked with quiet precision at their stations while the enemy fleet completed their encirclement of the Falcon's position. War Chief Grakthos felt a surge of satisfaction as his ships formed a perfect sphere around the trapped human vessel. The chase was finally over and his prey had nowhere left to run. The asteroids that had protected them during the pursuit now formed walls of a prison that would hold them while his ships moved in for the kill. This was exactly how he had planned the engagement to end from the very beginning. Lieutenant Commander Park made final adjustments to her weapons systems, but did not target any of the approaching ships. Instead, she focused her attention on several large asteroids that contained unusual mineral formations according to the ship's sensors. Her fingers moved across the control panels with the careful precision of someone following a rehearsed sequence rather than reacting to immediate threats. Zixtal observed the scene from his distant position and felt confused by what he was seeing. The humans should have been broadcasting surrender terms or making desperate last-minute attacks against their enemies. Instead, they appeared calm and confident despite being completely surrounded by superior forces. Either they had lost their minds from stress, or they knew something that was not apparent to outside observers. Chief Engineer Ben Curtis reported from the engine room that all modified systems were functioning perfectly. The changes made to the Falcon's drive systems were not visible on external scans, but they had apparently been designed for this specific situation. Zixtal made notes about possible secret human technologies that might explain their unusual confidence in the face of certain defeat. Grakthos opened a communication channel to the human ship and spoke in the threatening tone that had convinced many enemies to surrender without further resistance. His words were translated into human language by automated systems as he demanded immediate submission and promised swift death for those who cooperated with his demands. Captain Morrison responded to the surrender demand with a smile that never reached his eyes and contained no warmth or fear. He thanked the war chief for gathering all his ships in such a convenient formation and suggested that the raiders might want to reconsider their tactical position before proceeding with their attack. The humans' calm confidence was unsettling in ways that Grakthos could not fully understand. The Kethrak commander decided to end this strange conversation with immediate violence and ordered his ships to open fire on the surrounded human vessel. However, before his weapons could charge to full power, Lieutenant Park activated her targeting systems and began firing the Falcon's plasma cannons at carefully selected points on nearby asteroids. The human weapons did not target any of the Kethrak ships, but instead struck specific mineral deposits within the surrounding rocks. Each shot hit crystalline formations that had been precisely mapped during the apparent chase through the asteroid field. The humans had not been fleeing randomly, but had been conducting a detailed survey of their environment while leading their pursuers to this exact location. The asteroids began exploding in carefully timed sequences that sent massive chunks of debris flying through space at incredible velocities. However, this was not random destruction, but a precisely calculated display of controlled demolition that turned every piece of flying rock into a guided projectile aimed at specific targets. Zixtal watched in stunned amazement as the human plan revealed itself in all its terrifying complexity. They had not stumbled into this trap by accident, but had designed it specifically to counter Kethrak tactical doctrine. Every aspect of the engagement, from the initial positioning to the final explosive sequence, had been planned in advance with mathematical precision. The debris cloud expanded outward from the central explosion in patterns that seemed random, but actually followed ballistic calculations that accounted for the position and movement of every Kethrak ship. Chunks of rock the size of small buildings hurtled through space on intercept courses that would have been impossible to achieve without extensive prior planning and preparation. Amy Chen piloted the Falcon through the chaos with movements that seemed to anticipate every piece of flying debris before it appeared on the sensors. She used the ship's modified thrusters to redirect incoming rocks with split-second timing, while simultaneously avoiding larger chunks that could have destroyed them instantly. The human pilot was not just avoiding the destruction, but actively participating in directing it toward enemy targets. War Chief Grakthos tried to rally his scattered ships, but found his formation completely disrupted by the barrage of guided meteors. His vessels were designed to fight other ships in open space, but had no defense against kinetic weapons that moved too fast to track and hit too hard to deflect. The asteroids struck his ships with the force of orbital bombardment weapons, while his own guns remained useless against targets that were already dead rock. 3 Kethrak ships disappeared in brilliant flashes as massive asteroid fragments punched through their bio-enhanced hulls like bullets through paper. The remaining vessels tried to retreat, but found their escape routes blocked by more flying. Debris that seemed to have been positioned specifically to prevent any possibility of flight from the killing zone. Navigator Chris Parker coordinated with the ship's computer systems to calculate probability cascades in real time and feed targeting information to Lieutenant Park. The humans were not just fighting a battle, but conducting a complex physics experiment that used the entire asteroid field as a weapon system designed to destroy specific targets with mathematical certainty. The engagement was over in less than 10 minutes, but the aftermath would echo through galactic military thinking for generations to come. The humans had not simply won a victory, but had demonstrated a completely new approach to warfare that rendered traditional tactical doctrines obsolete. What followed was not a battle in any sense that Zixtal could understand, but rather a demonstration of warfare as precise art form. The humans did not simply fight their enemies, but choreographed their destruction with mathematical elegance that turned chaos into controlled symphony. Every piece of flying debris moved according to calculations that had been made before the first shot was fired. Amy Chen piloted the Falcon through the storm of asteroid fragments like a dancer performing steps that had been rehearsed countless times. She used the ship's modified thruster systems to redirect incoming rocks with timing so perfect that each deflection sent debris toward specific Kethrak vessels with deadly accuracy. The humans had turned defensive, maneuvering into an offensive weapon that multiplied their firepower by orders of magnitude. Communications Officer Dan Rodriguez coordinated with the ship's artificial intelligence systems to process millions of trajectory calculations every second. The computer predicted where each piece of debris would travel, while Rodriguez adjusted for variables like gravitational effects and collision impacts that could change the path of flying rocks. Together, they created a real-time guidance system that turned random destruction into precision strikes. Lieutenant Commander Park continued firing at selected asteroids, but her targets were not random. She had memorized the mineral composition and structural weaknesses of hundreds of rocks during their apparent flight through the field. Each shot was designed to create specific fragmentation patterns that would produce debris of particular sizes moving at calculated velocities toward predetermined impact points. War Chief Grakthos tried desperately to coordinate his remaining ships, but found that every defensive maneuver he attempted had been anticipated and countered before he could execute it. When he ordered his vessels to cluster together for mutual protection, they found their formation channels blocked by debris that seemed to have been placed there specifically for that purpose. When he commanded them to scatter and retreat individually, they discovered that escape routes had been eliminated by carefully positioned asteroid fragments. The Kethrak commander realized with growing horror that the humans had studied his species' tactical doctrines and psychological responses with scientific thoroughness. Every decision he made played directly into their strategy because they had prepared counters for every possible reaction he might have to their attack. He was not fighting an enemy, but dancing to music that had been composed specifically for his destruction. Zixtal recorded everything while struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. The humans fought like they possessed some form of limited precognition that allowed them to know what their enemies would do before those enemies knew it themselves. However, this was not supernatural ability, but the result of exhaustive preparation and analysis that treated warfare as a problem to be solved rather than a contest to be won. Captain Morrison stood calmly on his bridge while his crew executed their plan with the smooth efficiency of a well-rehearsed performance. No orders were needed because every crew member knew exactly what their teammates would do at every moment of the engagement. They functioned like components of a single organism that had been designed specifically for this type of complex operation. The remaining Kethrak ships tried to break through the debris field, but found themselves channeled into kill zones where concentrated asteroid impacts waited to crush them. The humans had created a three-dimensional maze that offered the illusion of escape while actually guiding their enemies toward predetermined destruction points where multiple pieces of debris would converge simultaneously. Technical Specialist Karen White monitored the battle from her station and made small adjustments to the targeting calculations based on real-time observations of debris behavior. She compensated for unexpected variables like asteroid rotation and gravitational interactions that could affect the precise timing of impacts. Her work ensured that every piece of flying rock arrived at its target at exactly the right moment to achieve maximum destructive effect. The Falcon moved through the chaos without taking any significant damage despite being surrounded by deadly debris flying in all directions. This seemed impossible until Zixtal realized that the humans had calculated safe corridors through the destruction zone before creating it. They knew where every piece of debris would travel because they had designed the entire sequence of events to create those specific trajectories. 5 more Kethrak ships disappeared under the relentless barrage of guided meteors, while the survivors found their weapon systems damaged by smaller fragments that struck with surgical precision. The raiders could not return fire effectively because their targeting systems were designed to track enemy ships rather than random pieces of rock that moved too fast and too unpredictably for conventional weapons to engage. War Chief Grakthos watched his fleet disintegrate around him while the human ship continued its deadly dance through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate safely. The Falcon twisted and turned between massive asteroid chunks with movements that seemed to violate basic principles of physics, but actually represented piloting skills that had been developed through years of practice in similar environments. Though engagement demonstrated that humans approached warfare with fundamentally different assumptions than other galactic species, where traditional military thinking emphasized superior technology and overwhelming force, humans relied on environmental manipulation and psychological warfare to defeat enemies without directly engaging them in conventional combat. Zixtal began to understand that he had completely misunderstood human military capabilities because he had been analyzing them according to standards that did not apply to their unique approach to warfare. As the last functional Kethrak ships limped away from the asteroid field, with their hulls torn open and their formations shattered, Zixtal understood that everything he thought he knew about galactic warfare had been fundamentally wrong. The humans had not simply won a battle, but had demonstrated a completely different philosophy of combat that made traditional military thinking obsolete. Captain Morrison finally opened a communication channel to the fleeing war chief and spoke, with the calm confidence of someone who had never doubted the outcome of the engagement. He explained that Grakthos's reputation had preceded him and that human intelligence services had studied every battle the Kethrak commander had ever fought. They knew his tactical preferences, his psychological patterns, and his species' instinctive responses to different types of threats. The war chief responded with a mixture of rage and bewilderment that his translator rendered in standard galactic, as demands for explanation. How could a young species with limited military experience defeat seasoned warriors who had conquered dozens of star systems? Grakthos could not accept that his defeat was the result of superior strategy rather than some form of technological trickery or supernatural intervention. Morrison's answer was delivered with the cold precision of a professor explaining basic concepts to a slow student. Humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years before they ever reached the stars, and had perfected warfare against opponents who shared their creativity, adaptability, and desperate cunning. Fighting aliens who followed rigid tactical doctrines was almost disappointingly easy compared to the challenges of defeating other humans who could think and adapt as quickly as they could. Technical specialist Karen White brought up holographic displays that showed the complete battle analysis with every Kethrak move predicted and countered before it was executed. The humans had run computer simulations of this exact scenario over 300 times while accounting for every possible variable, including weather patterns, gravitational effects, and psychological factors that might influence enemy decision. Making Zixtal realized that the human ship had not entered this asteroid field by accident, but had been modified specifically for this type of engagement. The thruster systems that allowed them to redirect debris had been installed weeks ago, while the weapons targeting software had been programmed with detailed maps of every rock in the field. The entire engagement had been planned from beginning to end with the precision of a scientific experiment. War Chief Grakthos made one final attempt to salvage his reputation by threatening revenge and promising that the Kethrak Empire would send larger fleets to destroy the humans once word of this defeat reached their home worlds. His words carried the desperate bravado of someone trying to convince himself that this loss was just a temporary setback rather than a complete demonstration of tactical inferiority. Captain Morrison's response contained a warning that sent chills through Zixtal's understanding of human capabilities. The battle they had just witnessed was not even humanity's best strategy, but had been chosen specifically because it was the most straightforward approach that would send a clear message to other galactic powers. Earth's military had dozens of more sophisticated plans for dealing with different types of enemies and had been preparing for galactic warfare long before making official contact with alien civilizations. The Falcon began moving toward the edge. of the asteroid field while leaving behind a debris cloud that told the story of complete tactical supremacy. 43 humans had just defeated over 200 seasoned warriors without suffering a single casualty or taking any significant damage to their ship. The mathematics of the engagement made no sense according to traditional military calculations. Navigator Chris Parker plotted their course home, while Captain Morrison reviewed battle recordings that would be studied by Earth's military academies for years to come. The humans treated this victory not as a perfect success, but as a learning experience that would help them prepare for more challenging enemies who might be intelligent enough to adapt to human tactics. Communications Officer Dan Rodriguez monitored galactic communication networks and reported growing panic among alien military commands as news of the engagement spread through space. Multiple species were demanding emergency sessions of the Galactic Council, while others were quietly beginning diplomatic overtures toward Earth in hopes of avoiding similar demonstrations of human military capabilities. Zixtal found himself faced with the impossible task of explaining to the Hegemony Council that their fundamental assumptions about galactic power structures had been completely wrong. How do you tell civilizations that had dominated space for millennia that newcomers had just rendered their military advantages meaningless through superior thinking rather than superior technology? The humans had revealed themselves to be apex, predators who had been studying their potential prey with scientific thoroughness while disguising their true capabilities behind a facade of primitive emotionalism. Their apparent weaknesses were actually sophisticated psychological camouflage designed to make enemies underestimate them until it was too late to mount effective resistance. Chief Engineer Ben Curtis reported that all ship systems were functioning normally despite the complex maneuvers they had performed during the engagement. The modifications made to the Falcon had been tested extensively in Earth's asteroid belts, where human pilots regularly practiced the type of precision flying that other species considered impossible or suicidal. As the human ship jumped to hyperspace and disappeared from his sensors, Zixtal realized that the galaxy was about to change forever. Humanity had announced their arrival not as junior partners seeking acceptance, but as dominant predators ready to reshape galactic civilization according to their own vision of how power should be distributed among the stars. Zixtal's report to the Galactic Council would be the most difficult document he had ever written, because it required him to admit that his entire career had been based on fundamentally flawed assumptions about the nature of warfare and military intelligence. How do you explain to established powers that they had completely misunderstood an entire species and that their strategic planning was now obsolete? The data from the engagement painted a picture that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about human capabilities. The aliens had dismissed humanity as an emotional and impulsive species that lacked the sophisticated thinking required for serious military operations. Instead, they had encountered opponents who planned several moves ahead, like master strategists, playing a game that their enemies did not even know existed. Captain Morrison's crew celebrated their victory with quiet professionalism rather than the wild emotionalism that alien observers expected from humans. They understood that this engagement was just the beginning of a much larger campaign to establish Earth's position among the galactic powers. Every second of the battle would be analyzed by military academies across human space as they prepared for future conflicts against increasingly sophisticated enemies. The Falcon's journey home took several days, during which the crew continued their normal duties while processing the implications of what they had accomplished. They had not simply defeated a superior force, but had demonstrated tactical principles that would revolutionize how wars were fought throughout the galaxy. Their victory would be studied by both allies and enemies for generations to come. Navigator. Chris Parker plotted their course through hyperspace while monitoring communication networks that carried news of the engagement to every corner of civilized space. Multiple alien governments were demanding emergency meetings of their military commands, while others were quietly beginning diplomatic contacts with Earth in hopes of avoiding similar demonstrations of human military capabilities. Communications. Officer Dan Rodriguez coordinated with Earth's intelligence services to ensure that complete records of the battle reached human military planners who were already working on the next phase of their expansion into galactic politics. The engagement had been designed not just to defeat the Kethrok, but to send a message to every species that might consider challenging human interests in the future. Technical specialist Karen White compiled detailed analysis reports that would help Earth's scientists understand how their weapons and tactics performed under real combat conditions. The humans approached warfare like a scientific discipline where every engagement provided data that could be used to improve future operations. They learned from their victories as methodically as other species learned from their defeats. Zixtal realized that his fundamental error had been assuming that humans fought wars the same way other species did, by relying primarily on superior technology or overwhelming numbers. Instead, they used psychological manipulation, environmental exploitation, and predictive modeling to defeat enemies without engaging them in conventional combat. They turned their opponent's strengths into weaknesses and made the battlefield itself a weapon. The implications of human tactical thinking extended far beyond military operations into every aspect of galactic civilization. If they could manipulate asteroid fields with such precision, then they could probably engineer similar advantages in space stations, planetary defenses, and even diplomatic negotiations. Their approach to problem-solving suggested capabilities that went far beyond what anyone had previously imagined. Chief Engineer Ben Curtis reported that the ship's modified systems had performed flawlessly during the engagement, and that similar upgrades were being installed on other vessels throughout Earth's growing fleet. The humans were not treating this victory as an isolated success, but as proof that their theories about advanced warfare were correct and could be applied on a much larger scale. Captain Morrison reviewed the battle recordings one final time before filing his official report with Earth Command. He noted areas where their performance could be improved and identified tactical innovations that might be useful in future engagements. The humans treated every victory as a learning experience rather than a final achievement. As the Falcon approached Earth's outer defense perimeter, Morrison reflected on the broader implications of their mission. They had proven that humanity could compete with established galactic powers despite their technological disadvantages. More importantly, they had demonstrated that human military thinking was fundamentally different from anything their enemies had encountered before. Lieutenant Commander Park secured her weapons systems and began planning modifications that would make them even more effective in future engagements. She understood that other species would study this battle and develop countermeasures for human tactics. The key to maintaining their advantage would be staying several steps ahead of enemies who were just beginning to understand how humans really fought. The crew of the Falcon had accomplished something that would echo through galactic history for centuries to come. They had announced humanity's arrival as a major power not through diplomacy or trade agreements, but through a demonstration of military superiority that could not be ignored or dismissed. The galaxy would never underestimate humans again. Zixtal completed his report with a simple recommendation that would change how every species approached relations with Earth. Do not underestimate humans. Do not engage them in warfare unless absolutely necessary. And if engagement becomes unavoidable, then pray to whatever gods you believe in, because traditional military thinking will not save you from opponents who have spent millennia perfecting the art of killing their own kind. The age of human dominance in galactic warfare had begun, and the rest of the galaxy was about to learn what it meant to face enemies who treated war as both science and art.